9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's a week after the election. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm your host, and we're going to do something a little unusual here. We've got some of the folks that we usually have on our foreign policy and national security podcast, and one of the guys we usually have on our political podcast, because those two things have intersected this week. So joining us, as always, we have the wonderful Rosa Brooks, who is at an undisclosed location. How are you doing, Rosa?
Oh, the apocalypse is going very well so far. I'm finding it quite bracing.
Yeah, it's bracing. It's unfortunately precisely as you predicted it. Of course, we have our old friend David Sanger of the New York Times. How are you doing, David?
Good. Oh, it's just been a joyous week of news to write.
Yeah, fantastic week of news to write. And writing commentary on that news is our friend EJ Dionne of the Washington Post. How are you doing, EJ?
It's great to be here. One of the good things about the week will be seeing you and Rosa and David again. Good to be with old friends.
Yeah, well, we've all aged quite a bit the past week too.
You look pretty good,
except for Rosa, of course. Yeah. Well, let's just start off with this past week. I'll come to Rosa last, as is her want. Let me start with you, EJ. There is a sort of been, every couple of hours there's been a new Trump cabinet announcement or sub-cabinet announcement, and some of these have been so off the wall that a lot of the reaction I'm getting from people is kind of like, "Oh my God, can you believe it?" And this is crazy, and it's kind of hysterical and half humorous. But this seems real serious to me. It doesn't seem funny to me. Having people who are completely unqualified for their jobs seems threatening to me. Having a president who doesn't care seems threatening to me. Having people who are associated with foreign enemies seems threatening to me. And that perhaps, the conversation deserves to be a little bit more subdued because the risks involved are actually much more serious. What do you think, EJ?
Well, I think if there is anything good about this, I'll start there. It's that anyone who thought that Trump he'd be more normal, these things are things he says and he doesn't really mean them, has to look at what he's done this week and say, oh my God, this is as bad as it could get, or maybe it can get worse than this, but this is extremely serious. The notion of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General may be laughable, but it's also very, very scary. And even if the Senate, the Republican Senate, finds it in itself, or at least 4 or 5 senators find it in themselves to block him, it gives you a very clear indication of where Trump wants to take, how politicized Trump wants the Justice Department to be. And you can imagine a massive outflow of people from the Justice Department if they have to work for Matt Gaetz, which may be what the Trump administration is looking for. Similarly, Tulsi Gabbard, in a way that astonished me even more than the appointment of Gaetz, because someone who has had relationships with a lot of America's enemies, this just is, to give her the intelligence job is, it's so baffling that it's even more scary than Gaetz at AG, so that I think it pulls people back. And I think that the Senate, in electing John Thune as opposed to Rick Scott, the most important thing about that vote, of course, is that it was a secret ballot. So no one who voted against the Trump world's preferred candidate, Rick Scott, had to worry about immediate retaliation. I like to think it shows that some Republican senators think they will have to be somewhat independent from Trump and want somebody to protect them. On the other hand, John Thune has, despite some criticism of Trump in the past, fallen into line so far. But this is just a week where we all know how seriously we have to take the dangers that we confront.
No question. David, what's your reaction?
Well, it's interesting because the week started with two nominations that were within the realm of what we expected. Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. You may or may not like his views, but he's been in the Senate now for, 15 years. He's been on the Intelligence Committee. He may have views that listeners of Deep State Radio might have some issues with, but he's certainly qualified for the job. The National Security Advisor, who they chose here, Mike Waltz, is not as qualified. I think will have a challenge running an operation as big as the National Security Council, but whose views are within the guideposts to some degree of Washington debate. And then for DNI and for Secretary of Defense, and certainly for Attorney General, you got three people who the immediate question that you heard from Republicans, not just Democrats, was, who? They weren't on my list? Why would they do this? Are these people confirmable? And the answer may be that the president doesn't care whether they're confirmable, that he has a strategy in place. He's hinted at along the way here of doing recess appointments. A recess appointment done early in his term would take them to the end of 2026. So you'd have about 2 years. If you look at the first term, there weren't many national security officials in the Trump White House or State Department or Defense Department that lasted much longer than that. And he may think that if his message out here is, I am going to go dismantle those elements of the deep state that I have most complained about, these are the people to go do it.
I will point out, by the way, we're recording this on a Thursday afternoon, and within the past hour, the news has been that it looks like whether you think Waltz is capable or not, that in line for his deputy are a couple of guys who are kind of crazy, and Sebastian Gorka and Michael Anton. And that can take a normal appointment and make it seem a little more out there. Rosa, what's your reaction?
That was good.
Yeah, there's the one and only silver lining I can come up with. These are extremist appointments. Well, this is not the silver lining part. This is the we're screwed part. Pete Hegseth, for instance, Trump's announced nominee for Secretary of Defense, was one of the dozen members of the National Guard who, during Biden's inauguration, the Pentagon, after vetting, decided that he was too extreme to be allowed to participate. He has a record of association with white Christian nationalist groups. This is not a guy who's even close to the mainstream of the United States. He's very far out there. The Tulsi Gabbard can't even think of anything to say except that it's shocking. This is a woman who the Russians have cheerfully described as a Russian asset. Which seems like it ought to be potentially disqualifying for someone to serve in a critical national intelligence position. So here's the silver lining part. I do think there is a trade-off between loyalty and competence, and loyalty and the competence defined in part as the ability to make large, clunky bureaucratic institutions work. And Trump wants to do a lot of things. but they're in tension with one another. He wants to simultaneously use the powers of the federal government for all kinds of nefarious and destructive purposes. But he also wants to install loyalists who are going to face enormous institutional pushback within those departments and agencies. And even if he goes full steam ahead on Schedule F and manages to convert many, many career civil servants into political appointees, and therefore can reassign them or get rid of them, even if he literally fires 100,000 people, if you fire 100,000 people, there's still a whole lot of federal employees left. You can't fire everybody. And the more people you fire, the harder it is to get anything done, because you need people who know where the light switches are, where the light bulbs are kept and so forth, and you start running out of them pretty quickly. So I think that is the one and only silver lining I can come up with, is that he may be creating a situation in which he renders himself he successfully destroys a great deal of executive branch capacity, but he is not able to implement some of his wildest threats and fantasies.
Could I say something, David, just quickly in response to I think that's right, although maybe dismantling all this is enough for him. But I wanted to say something in response to David. The recess appointments are not a given. And I think this is the first test that Republicans in the Senate are going to face. And Trump has chosen to make it as hard as possible for them to stay loyal to him, because these are appointments, as we all agree, that many Republicans, if you ask them in private, would say are absurd choices. There's already a lot of pushback inside the Pentagon against Hegseth. And obviously, Gabbard and Gaetz make no sense to a lot of Republicans. And it's not automatic that he gets that 10-day window to make from the Senate to make these appointments. So I think they're going to face a very big test very early on.
No question about it. David, I'd like you to talk specifically about Tulsi Gabbard. You spend a lot of time talking to folks in the intelligence community. It would be hard to think of somebody much worse from the perspective of a lot of the folks I know in the intelligence community to be running it than somebody whose parent affiliations are to our enemies and folks like Bashar al-Assad. What's the feedback you're getting?
Where has she come up with many of the conspiracy theories that she espouses? She basically argued that the United States had bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and that was why Putin invaded, which picks up on a line of propaganda that the Russians had fed out. She has endorsed the idea that Putin was provoked into the invasion. You could certainly make an argument that NATO expansion over the years was a bad idea that would result in this kind of thing. But she's gone further and basically picked up the Russian lines. There is some question I have heard from people in the intelligence community that if she could get a security clearance through, then almost anybody could get a security clearance through. But we don't know yet what kind of security clearance or other investigatory processes the president has in mind here. There is a possibility.
And in fact, just to interject, there's some talk that he doesn't want any. He doesn't want background checks, and he's going to give clearances to whomever he wants, right?
That's and the president's got the power as an originating classification power to basically do that. He can give them that. So one theory is try to see if they make their way through. If they don't, then come up with another candidate who will do the same thing but might be slightly less objectionable and get that one through because the Republicans aren't going to deny him two in a row. Another theory is the recess appointments along the way, and there are many variants on this. I think the contrast to look at is with the first term. In the first term, at this part of the process, he was looking for people who, as he used to say, look like they came out of central casting. So he got Rex Tillerson, right, who, big guy, mane of white hair, used to run Exxon. He got Jim Mattis, loved the fact that he was called Mad Dog Mattis, even though Mattis hated that phrase, said, I've got a killer of a general, put him in, right? And Attorney General, similar things. He wanted people at that time who looked like they came out of the establishment, but he thought would be loyal to them. Then he discovered they weren't loyal to them, and he fired them. Now he has decided he's going through another formulation. He doesn't care whether they look like they come from the establishment. He cares about the loyalty test first. And if they anger the establishment, they must be the right person.
Rosa, we've been talking about these in the context a little bit of the politics and a little bit of the national security side. There's another dimension to this, and that dimension is what they say about what kind of president Trump wants to be, what they say about Trump's intentions with regard to the institutions of the United States government. You talked about him tearing things down, and perhaps that's enough for him. But there have also, we also have appointments on the Homeland Security side that are extremely dubious, and suggest that he does want to follow through with some of the most extreme ideas in terms of rounding people up. Yesterday there was this moment of Trump and Biden bending over backwards to make everything look normal. And Trump seems to be spending the week saying, nope, that's not the way it's going to go. You've thought a lot about what it would look like if Trump was headed in a bad trajectory. Does this week confirm your worst fears?
Gee, David. Yes, it does. I mean, and I have to say that even though it's not at all surprising, because as you know, I've spent a lot of the past year in the headspace of trying to understand how a second Trump administration might play out, and you participated in some of the simulation exercises that we did. It's not surprising, but it's still sort of shocking. And it is also shocking to me, frankly. I'm distressed that Joe Biden acted like things were normal with Donald Trump. You do a photo op smiling. I mean, really? I don't think this is a man who has given us any reason to think that he is going to be restrained by norms or laws. He is giving the finger to every democratic institution. And frankly, he's giving a finger to the American people. He's giving a finger to most of his own voters, although they don't realize that yet. I think they will discover that over the course of the next few years. But the Biden doing photo ops with him, smiling, seems to me like a mistake. It seems to me like anything that treats this as if it's just normal politics as usual. The administration changes, the party that got voted out is kind of grumpy about some of the new guys' nominees, et cetera, is just so badly missing the mark. I mean, this is we're in a political situation that I think just would have been inconceivable, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago. And I am very frightened. And in fact, I spend a lot of time talking, my goal in life is to puncture people's happy Pollyanna-ish bubbles. And I keep talking to people who say things like, well, yeah, this is just terrible, but, it's like a pendulum. It swings. It'll self-correct. They'll burn themselves out. And that's a possibility. I don't want to suggest that is not a possibility, because it is, partly because, as we've discussed, they've clearly decided that loyalty matters more than competence. But I don't think anybody should kid themselves that there's some inevitability about Trump failing and passing and things sort of go back to normal. I mean, the history of human societies strongly suggests that, things may change. There may be some equilibrium restored, but it may be way too late for any of us and for American democracy. So I'm not feeling good about where we are.
Yeah, one of the reasons I thought it'd be good to have EJ on here is that he has one of the more relentlessly sunny views of all the people I know. He tends to be very positive, and when he's not being positive, he's thoughtful and reflective. He tends not to overreact in a negative way. So, EJ, why don't you react to what your friend Rosa has just said?
I think I'll disappoint you on all fronts, on thoughtfulness and sunniness here. Because in many ways, I was thinking as Rosa was talking, there shouldn't be very many of those bubbles left to puncture at this point. And so I'm trying to play, if I try to play my sunniest role, it is not to say that I think American institutions are strong enough to handle this, because the institutions are only as strong as the people running them. And up to now, and that number two, we have now an entirely Republican Congress. So while Democrats can raise questions and maybe begin to form majorities with a few Republicans willing to say, this is crazy, we can't go with this, you still need those Republicans there. I sure would like to think they are, but we haven't had a lot of proof of that, except for the secret ballot vote, which didn't require a lot of immediate courage to elect Thune instead of Scott. As I say, if I want to be sunny, it's where I began, which is I really do think that by shattering people's illusions about who Trump is and what kind of government he's trying to run, a lot more people will be a lot more serious right from the start, that they will be on the lookout right from the start, that they won't say, well, let's give him time. Perhaps he won't be as bad, or perhaps he will propose some reasonable things. I think shattering people's illusions about what a second Trump term will look like. I mean, I think everybody on this call didn't have them going in, but anybody who wants to hang on to them knows that they've got a problem. And I think the fact that they realize they have a problem is way better for us than people trying to give him benefits of the doubt as he goes down these really questionable roads. That's about the best I can do for you on sunniness, David.
Well, it's probably as well as anybody can do on sunniness. David, one of the other stories of this week, which was broken by the Wall Street Journal, I'm sorry to mention that name to you, had to do with the fact that not only did Trump want to put a guy in charge of the world's largest military, organization, who has no experience running any organization, who has no experience with defense policy, who is aligned with extremist elements and so forth, but that he also is pondering the idea of setting up something called a warrior board, which could evaluate senior officers in the U.S. military and remove them for a variety of reasons, all of which basically, when boiled down, appear to be whether they're loyal to Trump or not. And with Pete Hegseth plus a warrior board, you can decapitate the U.S. military in a way Vladimir Putin never dreamed was possible. And I'm just wondering what your thought is about this.
So a few things. First, just in response to EJ, I just want you to know that EJ and I were once young, and we were once young in the same newsroom, and he once was sunny. Okay. What you just heard was fake EJ Sunny. Okay. Okay. Now, having established that, so there's a parallel between the warrior board and the efficiency board that Elon Musk is supposed to be running. And that is that the president, if he in fact creates these in the ways that we've heard the suggestion, and he hasn't fully yet, is trying to go create outside of government advisory boards, staff with people who would not have to then get vetted the way you would vet a government official, would not have to reveal their assets, would not have to have, all of the public stuff that comes with nominating somebody for a real senior government post. And then give legitimacy to a decision that he wants to make anyway. So what you've heard Pete Hegseth say is that he considers C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to be way too woke and bringing DEI into the Pentagon, and he wants all that gone, and that the chairman would be the first one to go with that. But in trying to get the legitimacy, they're trying to create these outside panels and pretend as if they were a real government panel. And I think the question is there any part of the bureaucracy or in the public mind that creates resistance to establishing a new institution that is specifically supposed to operate outside the rules that have been created for government institutions?
And I think that and I'd like Rosa, who's had experience there, to talk about this. By the way, the new song under Hegseth will be From the Halls of Fox News to the Shores of Newsmax. I mean, when you think about what his real qualifications are, although God bless his Bronze Stars. But I think that Trump could be courting a real crisis inside the military. I mean, if you talk about something very scary, what you said, David, is true about decapitating our military. But what kind of resistance can people inside the military put up? And you talk about creating a crisis about civilian control. I mean, a lot of people in there, I think, will look at this and say, this is terrible for national security and borders on the beginning of illegal orders, which they are supposed to disobey, although we don't quite know what illegal orders are given the Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity. But I think that this commission or this board could inspire a very early crisis with the military. I guess in some ways, I hope it does, because I think a lot of professional military will be appalled by all of this. Rosa, am I right about that?
I think you're right about that. I mean, a couple of things in there. One, the president having immunity does not render an illegal order any less.
Correct. I think that's right.
Number one, I mean, immunity means that you can't be prosecuted for it, but it doesn't change the underlying illegality if something is illegal. Number two, obviously, Trump has immunity, but the members of the military don't.
Right.
They're still liable under federal and state criminal laws, under the UCMJ, et cetera. And yes, they do have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders. I think that, so on the one hand, I don't think anybody should imagine that there's going to be some sort of military rebellion. I think the sort of norms of civilian control of the military have been deeply internalized by the U.S. military, which is as it should be. And I think the other challenge is that illegal orders don't tend to come with a post-it on top of them that says these orders are illegal. They tend to come with a bunch of memos that look nice from a bunch of tame lawyers who say it's all completely fine. This isn't torture. This isn't a war crime. It's totally fine. Go right ahead. And it's the very rare member of the military who, faced with something coming from the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, God knows what that looks like under Matt Gaetz, or the White House says, you may say this is lawful, but I say it's not lawful. Especially assume that some key people have been removed, assume that everybody else is feeling nice and scared as a result. It's a very rare person who's going to push back. That being said, I think the Supreme Court's immunity decision, ironically, will result in more rather than less pushback than we would have gotten before that decision, precisely because the assumption in a normal administration, and one where there is no presidential immunity, would be that if an order is coming from the White House, it must have been vetted very carefully already. And now the assumption will be they're not going to have vetted anything. And they may have immunity, but we don't. We better check. So I do think we will see a tremendous amount. And this is something that the Pentagon, like all government agencies, specializes in. Is as one of my friends was joking, you say to the Air Force, "Do you have any airplanes?" They're like, "Airplanes? What airplanes? What's an airplane? We don't know what airplanes, where, why, who." They don't like to answer questions. There's always tension between White Houses and the Pentagon. Inevitably, because the White House typically, under any party, has all sorts of things that they want the military to do that the military is not crazy about. And the military is extremely good at saying things like, we didn't understand that order. Could you please clarify? That does not compute with what assets, with what authorities. Where is the, we don't get this. We don't have people there. We don't have any airplanes. What airplanes? And that's going to happen, I think, no question about it. That is not unlawful. That, on the contrary, is part of the military doing what it should do, which is giving best military advice, which sometimes consists of saying, even to the president, what you are saying can't be done or makes no sense. That being said, I think at the end of the day, although there will be a lot of that, because people are not going to like it when, senior level, well respected, well liked leaders who have, proven themselves over and over again within the institution, people are not going to like it if they are shoved out the door. But at the end of the day, there may be stalling, there may be questions, there may be reluctance, there may be some resignations, but the military is going to do what the president tells them to do at the end of the day, I think.
So the reason I raised that, by the way, is I happen to know a bunch of JAG lawyers who felt that the immunity decision did not take into account the complexity of the back and forth between the president and the military, which is a big deal. I'm heartened by what you say, which makes sense that they will be more cautious rather than less cautious going forward.
Just because we have a very brief amount of time left, I want to say a couple of things very quickly and then ask you each one 30-second question. One, I do want to point out, amplifying on what Rosa said, the immunity decision only gives immunity to the president. It doesn't give immunity to anybody else in the government.
Correct.
And anybody who thinks that it does is making a terrible mistake. Secondly, this has been a long time coming, and this tension here between the president, his loyal people around him, and the so-called deep state, which has apparently given us here Deep State Radio Elise on life for the next few years, is the whole reason I wrote American Resistance, and I went out and interviewed 100 people in the Trump administration the last time, because they all said there was this kind of pushback, and then the Trump people said, we're going to get rid of this next time around, and they talked exactly about how they're going to do it. So this story is evolving exactly as it was predicted to evolve years ago. I now want to ask you each a 30-second question. President apparently has just announced, or is about to announce, yet another cabinet appointment, and that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head the Department of Health and Human Services. EJ, you may have the first 30-second response to this.
Are we going to bring back polio? This is frightful. I'm almost speechless, actually. I know you can't be speechless on a podcast, but we're having a sweepstakes here. Which is more irrational, RFK Jr. there or Matt Gaetz at Justice? We can have a quiz.
Well, the answer is Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth.
Yeah. So
anyway, right. David, I just want to get your reaction before you run out and buy a lot of raw milk.
Yes, I put it on order on Amazon here while we've been talking. Maybe the strategy here is he's thinking that the Senate would not reject all of these, and so they're going to reject one or two of his most extreme and then feel like they have to back him up for the remainder.
Oh, boy.
Or maybe he thinks these will all be rejected and anybody else he names will look moderate and reasonable after they're all rejected.
Well, let's be absolutely clear. It's impossible to choose between Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth and Kristi Noem, for that matter, as unqualified people for these jobs. But we don't have to choose. That they actually all are. Rosa, the last word to you before you go and change your ticket at the airport to a distant country.
Well, so again, here's my only other silver lining, and it's a pretty crappy silver lining. Although I don't think that there is any automatic self-correction that happens. I do think it is possible that they will overreach and they will fall hard. By which I don't mean Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in particular or any particular individual, but the whole Trump administration. As you all know, part of the story of Trump's win has to be viewed in the context of incumbent failures around the globe, not just in the United States in recent elections. Incumbent parties on both left and right have fallen. People coming out of the pandemic, inflation, et cetera. Clearly, publics around the globe are not feeling too friendly towards incumbent parties who they blame, rightly or wrongly, for anything that has gone wrong in the last few years. Well, Trump is about to own it again. And for the same reasons that I think he got voted out in 2020, I don't want to hurt his feelings by saying got voted out, but between us, let's just say he did get voted out. That you put in somebody, kids are going to get sick, right? There are going, you put in RFK Jr., kids are going to get sick. The FDA is not going to be doing its job. All kinds of bad things are going to be happening. Bad things are going to be happening at the Defense Department. Bad things are going to be happening in the intelligence world. Bad things are going to be happening economically. Trump goes ahead with his plans for tariffs, for instance. Boy, people are going to be very unpleasantly surprised, the people who voted for him, thinking, "Oh, this is great," when they see what happens. And I do think that if we can kind of keep the vestiges of democratic institutions alive long enough to get us through the 2026 midterm elections, for instance, we may see a real backlash from the American public against Trump when they realize that all of those "I will take care of you, I will protect you, it's going to be great" promises are in fact turned into a world of hurt for them.
Yeah, and then could I play my sunny self and say I can't imagine a better and more delightful group to discuss fantastically scary things with than this wonderful group of people.
Wow. That really is it's not at all uplifting, EJ. Literally Germany had King Ludwig II, who was called the Mad King because he built a loopy castle in Neuschwanstein. We're entering an era which may be attributed to America's first mad president, because these choices are just astonishing. But we will be here. We will talk about them. For those of you who thought there is no need for something called Deep State Radio anymore, you're wrong. There certainly is. I wish there weren't, but there certainly is. And we'll be back each and every week, many times each week, with podcasts like this one. I do want to say one thing, by the way. The day after the election, I left Twitter and moved over to Blue Sky and Substack, and I am spending no time at Twitter. I noticed our friend Ed Luce went over there, and there was even a post on Blue Sky this morning saying, "Glad to see you and Ed over here. Where are Rosa and David?"
I went to Blue Sky too. It's just that I am, unlike you, I am not a prolific poster of stuff. But there I am, at rosabrooks.bsky.social. And if people follow me, I'll feel happy, but I won't post anything anyway because I don't.
This may be a great moment to go cold turkey on social media. What do you think?
No, that world is over, David. that world is over. Anyway, you guys are the very best. I'm really glad to be able to talk to you. I hope you have a great remainder of the week. How much crazier can it get? Well, we shall see. EJ, great to see you. David, great to see you. Rosa, great to see you. Thanks, everybody. Be back for more each and every day here at the DSR Network. Until then, bye-bye.